One of the most interesting questions that I get consistently across the board is the question, do I believe in God? And I get this a lot more than you would think. I get it in emails, I get it in comments and comments explained, I get it in YouTube messages. But I get this question a lot, and it's really intriguing to me. I imagine a lot of people ask it just to know what my view is, because in reality, my religious perspective is pretty much unknown. I've never really told anybody whether or not I believe in God, mostly because of the fact that there was never a reason to. On Comics Explained, I never had a reason to tell anybody what my religious perspective was because it's not a personality-driven channel, it's a content-driven channel. I teach people about comic books, and that's about the end of it. But on this channel, it's definitely something worth exploring. It's definitely a question worth answering. So with an honest question, I think should come an honest answer. And the honest answer is that I don't know. I don't know if I believe in God. Now, if this was 5 years ago, 6, even 7 years ago, I would have told you not a chance. That the idea of God being real is preposterous, that it's ridiculous. I was part of that crowd of people who tore down other people for their religious views, that a person who believed in God was somehow mentally defective. In hindsight, it's a ridiculous notion to have. But for me, as I've grown older and I've grown wiser, and I've begun to understand the significance of religions in people's lives, I've come to this understanding that it's no small thing, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It's not a small thing to believe in a religion. And this is the reason why. Since the dawn of mankind, every human being has suffered an existential crisis. It's the nature of who we are as people. It's our sentience run away with us. Who are we? Where are we going? Who made us? What's our purpose here? Like, what's the point of this whole thing? Is there a greater power at work? Is this life we live basically just one giant test? And if we pass, then we get to go to heaven. If we fail, we go to hell. Is that the whole idea behind it? Or is it just that we are one of a multitude of organisms that have evolved to our current state and will evolve into something else, and some other organism will evolve to reflect us in some near form to how we exist right now? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I know science tries to answer it, and I know that the prevailing theory in science is the Big Bang, by a super dense and highly volatile form, the universe exploded out into its current state, and it's continuing to expand in an outward direction until it reaches its heat death and then eventually collapses in on itself. I know that that's a scientific explanation, or at least as close as I can get to it anyway. I'm not super well versed in astrophysics, so take it for what it's worth. But I also know that from a religious perspective, there's an attempt to understand things outside of the realm of science. To be honest, the answer to the question, why do people believe in religion, is multifaceted. There's no definitive answer there. I know people who believe in God for the sole fact that they're afraid if they don't, they'll go to hell. And I know people who believe in God because it just makes sense. And I know people who believe in God because for them, it gives them some measure of hope. For example, there was a guy that I knew, and I'm not going to name names here for the sake of him maintaining his anonymity, but there was a guy that I knew who lost one of his children at a very young age. And he and I had a conversation where we talked about God. We had this conversation about religion and so on and so forth. And I wanted to see what his perspective was, having endured such a harsh and terrible experience. And his idea was the good things that happen in life happen because of God. The bad things that happen, they just work out that way. And people will say, well, that's silly. If God makes good things happen, God makes that thing, bad things happen. But for him, it makes sense. And the reason why is because to lose someone like that, to lose a child in such a way, it's easier for him to believe that. Because the counter to that is God took his child away on purpose. And that's something that could crush your faith. It would destroy your belief in God. And I imagine for him, the fear of that being true is the fear of him losing his faith in God, the one thing he really has left to hold on to. When I was younger, when I worked at the University of Kentucky, a friend of mine, Kevin, he and I used to get into these amazing religious debates. We used to get into these awesome debates. It's one of the things I missed the most about working there. He would work until 7 o'clock. He'd work until, I don't know, like 8 or 9 or sometimes even 11. He'd work for all of second shift. And he and I would debate for hours about religion, about Christianity, about whether or not God's real. It was some of the best discussion that I think I've ever had in my life. Because what it did is it sort of forced me to start looking at things in a way that I wouldn't normally see them. And that wasn't something that I appreciated until after mom and dad, right? I mean, I told you guys before, mom and dad was the turning point. That was when my whole worldview changed. I mean, and when I say my whole worldview changed, I mean it changed. Like I ended a 15-year-long friendship like a week and a half ago, like that. Like I ended it in the blink of an eye. I can't snap. There we go. I ended a 15-year-long friendship like that. And the motivation behind that is something outside the scope of this video, but suffice it to say, it was the best move that I could make in order to be happy. But the fact remains here, a lot of the worldviews that I had were cast aside. Who Rob Jefferson was 7 years ago is largely gone and replaced by something that I think is much, much better. But behind me, on that bookshelf, if I were to go through and show you guys, which I'll do that at some point when I do a house tour, I can show you those books. And there's books like Why I'm Not Christian by Bertrand Russell. There's The God Delusion, the God Hypothesis, so on and so forth. All these different things where it looks at the concept of God from either a non-biased perspective or from an opposing perspective. And then I take that and I compare it to all the people that I know who believe in God. And I take it to the various things that are written in the Bible. And I compare and contrast. And I try to come to my own answer on, do I believe God is real? Do I believe that God exists? At the moment, I don't know. I acknowledge the fact that God may exist, but I don't take it as an absolute. And the reason why is because for me, it's not something you just jump into. You don't just, well, I'm going to go to the grocery store and believe in God. It doesn't work that way. Like believing in something that's significant is life altering. I mean, you hear about it all the time, born again Christians, people who, by whatever manner and whatever means, never had a reason to believe in God. And then they started and it totally turned their life around. So it's not something small that you do. Now, it doesn't mean that I would, suddenly transform this YouTube channel into like a Christian only channel. Not at all. It's just one of those things where I'm trying to figure out where I reside. It could be one of these things where I sort of fall in these gray areas where I say, well, God exists, sure. And there are some things that God does, but like God doesn't have a plan. There's no way you could. I mean, you can't have a plan. People's lives can't be pre-planned and then have free will. You're operating in free will going down a passage, going down a hallway. There's nowhere for you to go. So you have free will insofar as whether or not you go forward or not. But you don't really have any free will on what direction your life takes. I mean, there are different ways to believe in that, different ways to believe in some kind of a religion. But for me, I'm still trying to figure it out. Now, it could very well be that I come across like some woman somewhere, or I have some life experience, and it just shatters everything I think I know. And suddenly I'm just like, yep, God's real. That's how it was for my dad. I remember talking to my dad. I had this conversation with him once. And I said, because there was a point where he met Anita, which she turned his life around in so many amazing ways. But there was a point where he met Anita and he became far more religious than he ever had been before. And I remember asking him, what was the point when you switched? When you made this switch from being a person that acknowledged God may or may not exist to a person that believed in God, that intrinsically believed in God, and you knew he was real? And he said that was long before Anita. And I said, really? And he says, yeah. He says, that was when you were born. He said, when I held you in my arms for the first time, that's when I knew that God was real. And it was the same thing with my sister. And that was a very touching thing, but it was a very profound thing because people find religion in their own individual ways. I mean, some people are born into it, right? They're born and they're taught by their parents, God is an absolute truth. For others, they go on this sort of journey. They do what I'm doing. They go on a kind of spiritual journey of sorts. And by whatever manner and whatever means, they try to figure out on their own whether or not God is real. And that's where I'm at. I'm trying to find an answer to this question. So I don't know. I really don't know if I believe in God or not. I mean, I guess I believe that I believe the possibility that he exists, but I'm not in a position right now where I could sit here and say, I have fully and totally handed my life over to God and he'll take my life in whatever direction it goes in. I'm not in that position. Part of it's because I'm still clinging on to the idea that I don't like the idea that my fate is not in my own hands, that my life is outside of my control. There are elements of my life that are outside of my control, but I don't like the idea that I'm walking down a path that was predestined, that, despite the fact that I believe I have a choice, that I never really had a choice to begin with. I don't really like that whole thing. I still cling on to that a little bit. But again, things change. People change. We grow. We become something better than what we are. And that's the nature of what it means to be human. So with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end, and hopefully that answered your question. So I'm going to pitch it back to you. I'm going to ask you guys this question. And if it's a little personal, if it's too personal for you, you don't have to answer. But I'm curious, do you guys believe in God? Do you believe that God's real? Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section, and I will catch you all later. Peace.